All right, let's get right into it. What we're going to do here is unpack a fictional but incredibly detailed look at a conflict that, in this scenario, basically redrew the map for South Asia. We are talking about the India-Pakistan crisis of 2025, a flashpoint that truly changed everything. This one sentence from the analysis really says it all. It perfectly captures the stakes. This wasn't just another border skirmish or a minor flare-up. Nope. The events we're about to walk through created a fundamental break from the past, a rupture, and its shockwaves are still being felt today. So here's our game plan. We'll start with a terror attack that really lit the fuse. Then we'll get into India's massive high-tech response, and of course, Pakistan's powerful counterstrike. After that, we'll try to cut through all the noise of the information war. And finally, we'll see how this short, brutal conflict completely reset the global chessboard. To really get what happened here, you gotta rewind to early 2025. The whole region was simmering in this state of what you might call a cold peace. Tensions were super high, but they were sort of contained. But behind the scenes, the security situation was getting worse, fast. The stage was being set for a major explosion. This is the number that changed everything. 26. On April 22nd, 2025, a truly horrific terror attack in Pahalgam, a tourist spot in Kashmir, left 26 civilians dead. This wasn't random. It was a calculated, brutal massacre, and it was designed to provoke a massive reaction. And boy, did it work. In response, India unleashes this radical new strategy, the new normal doctrine. For decades, India had practiced what they called strategic restraint, mostly because they were afraid of nuclear escalation. Well, this new doctrine basically threw that entire playbook right out the window. It completely erased the line between non-state terrorists and the states that might be sponsoring them.
And this slide really breaks down the 4 pillars of this new doctrine. So first up, terror as war. It reframes a big terror attack as a direct act of war. Simple as that. Second, target equivalency. This means terrorist camps and any military assets protecting them are seen as one and the same target. The third one, this is a biggie, nuclear dehyphenation. It's basically a promise to hit back with conventional forces without being scared off by nuclear threats. And finally, a total spectrum response, pulling together military, economic, and even water resources.
So that brings us to India's response. On May 7th, it launched Operation Sindoor. Now, the name itself is incredibly symbolic. Sindoor is that red mark worn by married Hindu women, and it was chosen here to signify the protection of the homeland and to honor the victims of Pahalgam. The sheer technological power and, honestly, the speed of this operation were just staggering. This wasn't a single strike. It was a huge, wide-area interdiction campaign. India unleashed 72 aircraft, firing these incredibly advanced standoff missiles, weapons like the BrahMos and Scalp that let you hit targets from a very safe distance. And get this, they did it all from within their own airspace. The entire attack was over and done in just 23 minutes. Well, as you can imagine, this high-tech assault immediately triggered a massive response from the Pakistan Air Force, which led to this enormous duel in the sky. We're talking over 114 aircraft from both sides locked in a complex, high-stakes battle fought with long-range missiles way beyond what any pilot could actually see. Okay, so how did Pakistan respond? Well, 3 days later, it launched its own counteroffensive, Operation Bunyan-un-Marsoos. The name, which comes from a Quranic verse, translates to the solid wall, a name very deliberately chosen to rally religious and nationalist support against what they were framing as straight-up Indian aggression. Pakistan's strategy was guided by this doctrine they called quid pro quo plus. And the plus is the key part here. The goal was not just tit for tat. The whole point was to hit back harder, to make India pay a greater price, and to prove that their ability to deter a much larger adversary was still very much alive and well. This side-by-side comparison really clarifies the two different approaches, doesn't it? You see India relying on those standoff cruise missiles fired from its top-tier jets. Meanwhile, Pakistan counters with its own advanced fighters, guided rockets, and, this is a big deal, offensive drone swarms, a first for the region. As you can see, their strategic goals were totally different, and both operations ended up sparking major controversies that just exploded in the media. And that brings us to the information war. Because as the jets were flying and missiles were launching, an equally intense fight was happening online and on the news. In this conflict, like in so many others, the truth became the first and most frequent casualty, creating this dense, confusing fog of war. So Pakistan makes this really bold claim that it had shot down 5 Indian aircraft, including some of their most advanced Rafale jets. Now, India, they never confirmed that number, but they did eventually acknowledge some unspecified losses, which they blamed on political decisions that kept them from fully suppressing Pakistani air defenses. But the single most explosive claim, the one that really got everyone talking, was Pakistan's assertion that it had destroyed a prized Indian S-400 air defense battery. We're talking a system worth over $1.5 billion. India fiercely denied this, of course. They released satellite images they said proved the claim was totally fake, a denial that was actually supported by a lot of independent open-source intelligence, or OSINT analysts. You know, the folks who use publicly available data to verify this stuff. So let's quickly trace the domino effect here. You have the massacre on April 22nd. That triggers an immediate and pretty shocking response. Just one day later, India weaponizes water by suspending a key treaty. The military strikes then follow in early May, and by the end of that year, the long-term consequences of just these few weeks, a devastating water crisis and a major U.S. policy shift, were coming into sharp focus. All right, let's zoom out now and really look at the long-term fallout. This short, sharp conflict didn't just rattle India and Pakistan. It triggered a fundamental reset in the entire global strategic landscape. The world was different after this. And one of the most chilling outcomes was the beginning of what's called hydraulic warfare. By suspending the Indus Waters Treaty, India effectively turned river flows into a weapon. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. This directly threatened Pakistan's water supply and its agricultural heartland, creating a terrifying new existential battlefield. But maybe the biggest shock of all was the geopolitical earthquake it caused in Washington. For years, the U.S. had been pursuing an India-first policy, trying to build it up as a counterweight to China. But after the 2025 conflict, that all changed. U.S. planners were apparently pretty underwhelmed by India's military performance, but were very impressed by Pakistan's, leading to a complete strategic rethink. And this detail just illustrates the shift perfectly. The American administration, which was under President Trump at the time, pivoted back towards Islamabad. The U.S. media even coined this phrase, the Trump-Munir bromance, to describe the new, warm relationship. It was a stunning reversal of fortunes and the end of Pakistan's diplomatic isolation. So, where did all of this leave the region? Well, this final quote from the analysis says it all. The 2025 conflict didn't bring any real resolution. Instead, it created a dangerous new status quo, a new normal, where the absence of all-out war isn't peace, but a fragile, constantly managed state of hostility. It's a really stark reminder that in modern conflict, the most important battlefields might not be on land or in the air, but in cyberspace and over the control of life's most essential resource, water.